Well, good afternoon, everyone. Did it feel a little bit like a feast? It was like a feast day today. I guess Jerry Nichols, with inflation, is Jerry $50 now. I saw that tape and I said, wow, we got a new man. I said, when's he speaking here? Jeff Nichols. Wow. I'm going to read, this is off the board from Danny, in case y'all missed it. I hope y'all take a chance to watch that board. He goes through it pretty much every week. And he wrote these today. I said, wow, that's pretty good. Let me start the message off with him today, because today's going to be a little more uplifting. You know, we're sitting around the dinner table because my wife's in Katie's in Texas, and Casey was home with me. She had schooling. So I invited Danny over. I said, why should he be alone in misery by himself? Come over here and join me. Be misery together. So anyway, Katie's at dinner, and Danny says, what you going to speak on tomorrow? I said, man, I don't have a clue. I'm kind of running out of time. And I gave him a couple ideas, and Casey goes, why don't you speak on something happy for a change? And I said, what are you trying to say? You know, a lot of my messages, because I only get a couple times a month, and I try to focus on important issues that we're facing in the church and in America. But today it's going to be a sermon. It'll be a sermon you can use it before the feast, preparing for next year's feast, after the feast, or anytime during the year. But I'm going to talk about the Feast of Tabernacles. Because you see, the Feast of Tabernacles is something, as you'll see today, it's not just something that you plan on at the last minute and say, let me go see what's playing at the movies tonight, see if I want to go. It don't work that way for the Feast of Tabernacles. All right, so before I do, I got these 3 quotes from Danny. In prayer, it is better to have a heart without words than words without a heart. So, wow, that's pretty cool. I like that. You know, that caught my attention. So the second was, prayer will make a man cease from sin, or sin will make a man cease from prayer. So that's pretty good. And then the last one, more tears are shed over answered prayers than unanswered prayers. So anyway, I thought those were nice. I said, wow, let me read those with everybody. They were befitting as we had our prayer breakfast this morning. So, I mean, a great turnout. There was, everyone's heart was there, and those things changed my life. I get to meet you all, and you get to meet everyone else in a whole different light. Because as people are pouring out their heart and sharing their thoughts, you see where their mind is focused and where the attention is. And I actually got a call yesterday from Maina Sammons, who is going to be having a prayer breakfast at another one of the groups, who actually decided to do it today also. And so he said, listen, I've never done one of these yet. What do we do? So I was talking to him for about an hour and let him know. I said, be prepared for a life-changing experience, because this is something the Worldwide wouldn't do in the past. And it's, you know, if you get to 500 people in a meeting, that doesn't work like this did. You know, there's certain limitations. You might have to do it in different areas and different groups. But let me share, because this is on tape, a couple of things that came out that you're not aware of. Since last year, we've got 2 different Bible studies going on here in the local church here, and I'm not conducting any of them. It's the membership and the leadership. Clayton, for example, we got new people who came in. And they were saying, listen, we don't know about these certain things. So Clayton ran Bible studies for the new people coming into the church who've never been to the feast and hadn't been attending. They're brand new, just baptized. And then on Friday nights, Roland has been running Bible studies more in-depth, more knowledgeable, covering subjects that you normally don't get to cover on a weekly basis. And so we have those things going on. We have new people calling in. So we have a lot of things that's been going on in the community. Then today, during the prayer breakfast, we find out that, you know, the personal communication or the personal outreach by its members, that there are actually people getting together and they're discussing things about the Bible that hopefully they'll bring into the church one day. So, I mean, so you see the membership involvement going one-on-one, being led by God, is making a difference. And it was in several people, everybody's here shaking heads, this one said, my family member, this family member wants to know for the first time. This family member is doing better. So through all these things that are going on, you're seeing God at work in people's lives. And it's because you stepped up to the plate to trust God. You do what he says and he blesses you. That's the way it is for the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles, here's my title. God's Great Party. And so, well, party? Well, the term party means this: a social gathering of invited guests, typically involving eating, drinking, and entertainment. Now, isn't that what's going on? There's all kinds of entertainment at nighttime, and you can call the sermon messages, if they're delivered like they're supposed to be, not just entertaining, but enlightening. In other words, wow, I didn't know those things. I mean, you leave away excited, you leave thrilled. And so I called it God's Great Party because it's going to last for 1,000 years. And it's going to involve that. And when you go to Feast of Tabernacles, you got to be ready to eat. And of course, drinking in moderation. And we have seen some people do a little bit of overdoing it. We found one guy walking around in a parking lot, forgot who he was once. It's like, what is he doing? I didn't even know the gentleman. So he's just walking around totally lost. And entertainment, because, you need to, the entertainment means you're involved in either receiving or giving. So that means it takes people, it takes involvement. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you Tom's party plans for a great feast. Are you ready for this? My daughter said have a good time. And I think you're going to learn some stuff too. I think you're going to like this, and I want this to be good because you see, I want the youth to understand this too. And so when Casey was talking, she was saying, so and so, we were talking about the feast. She said, oh, they're going to have a great time at the feast. And that's coming from the youth. So when you go there, every member of your family should have a great time. But how do you have a great time? Now, I'm going to give you my experiences. Some of you have already heard some of these. So as I go through, I'm going to give you some of my experiences. My experiences was a learning curve. It was a major learning curve. When I went to the feast, I knew nothing about the feast. All right, so I really didn't know anything. My first Feast of Tabernacles was in Big Sandy, and you go to this hot building. It was hot. And they got fans everywhere. And it's not 100 or 200 people. There was 14 to 15,000 people there. Yeah, 14 to 15,000 people. And you got a parking lot where you got to get a binoculars to see where you're meeting at. And it's like being in Disney World, and they got these trams that run out and pick everybody up from the parking lot and bring you in. And we know it's kind of hot most of the time at the feast. And so we're going in, so all these things, I'm not prepared for all of this stuff. And then about the second day, it starts raining. And it rained. And rained and rained. Well, they get these camping going on out there. Now, I never was much for camping, period. Especially at the feast, getting dressed with a coat and tie going with a lot of sand fleas and bugs and everything else. So I'm really making this exciting. That's my carnality at the feast. These people are having a great time. And I'm saying, man, this is hot. Bugs are biting you. Like, what is going on? And it's one of the campsites got flooded out. And so here comes everybody out of this low area. I don't remember the name. Some of y'all shaking your head. You might remember this year. And they come walking out, and everybody's soaking wet, dragging everything. And they're still in good attitudes. All right, so I don't know where to go. I'm stuck in this tent. Now all these ladies, and they're trying to get dressed to go to some meeting that night, and I'm trying to get out so they can get dressed, and they're putting tent and blankets up. It's like, what's going on? I finally got out of there, and it rained for another day. I said, okay, I had enough of this feast. I'm going home. So I just packed up, and I went home. So my dad, because that was the first time any of my family ever went to a feast. And so I'm driving up, and I just say, hey, I'm back. And my dad was sick. He couldn't go. So he goes, what are you doing here? I said, I didn't like it. I came home. I never forgot this. He goes, you can't walk out of the feast. He says, you can't walk out of the kingdom. I said, what are you talking about, the kingdom? I didn't like the feast. I came home. See, I didn't even know what the feast represented and what it was doing there. One of the things that's supposed to help you overcome is me. immaturity, carnality, and impatience. You know, because, man, it just wasn't my cup of tea. Now, as I went through it, let me give you now, I'm going to give you some more stories as we're going through, but that was my first experience. I was there, but I wasn't there. All right, so you see what I mean? So you can go to the feast, but you may not be there, even if you are there. So I'm going to tell you have some party plans for a great feast. All right, this is God's party. And you go there, you have to be invited. Do you realize that? That's the very first rule. How many people who are out there just show up at the feast and they don't know that it's there? They just show up. No, God calls you to his feast, and then he commands that you go. See, and a lot of people don't realize that. So, no, that's for the Old Testament people. That's for the old stuff. So, no, wait a minute. You go to Zechariah. We're not going to turn there, but I'll mention it, Zechariah 14. When Christ comes, what's the first thing he does? He puts his feet, he stands on the Mount of Olives, and he issues the edict to attend the Feast of Tabernacles. And any person doesn't go, he's going to send them plagues. That's how important it is. So now, let me ask the question. If God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, yesterday we're keeping the feast, and we know tomorrow we're keeping the feast because Christ is going to keep it, and if you don't come, you're going to get plagues, you're going to break your legs. Every nation, including Egypt, it says, you will keep the feast or else. Why will we not keep it now? See, so it doesn't make sense. Let's use the same logic if he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. All right, so that's the very first rule of understanding. It's like if he's doing it when he comes back and we're commanded to do it then, who gave us the authority not to do it now? All right, so we're going to keep it. Let's go to Leviticus 23. So if you were studying the Bible, a little tip, just a little bit of a tip to help you out. If you're going to study a subject, you use your 5 W's. You remember the 5 W's are? You learned it in school? Not reading, writing, arithmetic. Who, what, when, where, and why. Now, you might know it in a different order, but who, what, when, where, and why. So if I study the holy days, who they're for, what are they, you go through the whole thing, and you begin answering your questions, and God will lead you through some of your answers. And you're going to learn more and more each year. And I tell you, with the holy days and the Feast of Tabernacles, I'll be honest with you, I learn every year more about these holy days. Linda and I were sitting at the table, we're talking about atonement, some of the understanding that's coming out with atonement that basically was just never looked into in the past. That God's just revealing more and more understanding of the same things we've always understood that doesn't change anything we've done. It just reinforces. It's like an onion. You peel a layer off, there's another layer. You peel that off, there's another layer. It's like the knowledge of God just goes on and on and on. So now, let me give you Leviticus 23. And I'm doing a lot of this now because there are new people here attending the Feast of Tabernacles for the first time. For all you old war horses, hopefully I can get a couple things in here that might keep your interest too. Leviticus 23, verse 33. So the Lord said to Moses, speak to the children of Israel, saying that on the 15th day of the 7th month, so that's July 15th. No, it's not July 15th. See, that's God's calendar. So if you're reading this, you got to understand we're on God's calendar, on God's timeline. And that's one thing that we're learning in the last couple of years more than ever. If we want to know what's going on, when we look at these things, we got to look at them from God's perspective. All right, on the 15th day of the 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles. And tabernacle is it means basically tabernacle, temporary dwellings. It talked about Christ who comes back. In these subjects, I can't cover everything today, but just when you think about something, it says that Christ who came down and tabernacled with man. What does he mean by that? In other words, Christ was dwelling temporarily with man. The tabernacle means is temporary dwellings, it's something, it's an event. It's deeper than that, I know, but that's one of the things that it does mean. So it's for 7 days you keep a feast unto the Lord. Sorry. So we go keep the feast, and I'll tell you this, is it's an 8-day feast, but it just told us to keep it for 7 days. So if you go look at it and you get confused when you see the 8th day, and I'm going to cover that in just a second. The Feast of Tabernacles is a 7-day festival. However, there's 8 days. So what's the 8th day? The 8th day is actually a separate festival. It's called the Last Great Day. And I'm going to explain that in just a second. But they back each other up. All All right, so they're right behind one another. All right, so that's what we've got. It says, on the first day shall be a holy convocation, thou shalt do no work. 7 days you shall offer an offering unto fire, and on the 8th day, but it just told you 7 days. Right? So the 8th day is a separate festival. It's called the last great day. And you'll see in the New Testament when Jesus Christ stands up, it says, and Jesus Christ stood up on that great day of the feast. It's referring to the 8th day or the last great day. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. You have a holy convocation. You shall offer an offering made by fire. At the solemn assembly you shall no work. All right, so we got 8 days. On the two ends, you have holy days. And so we have the holy days at the feast, on the first day and the 8th day. They're annual Sabbaths. And at some point, there's a Sabbath in between. Because anytime you got 8, there's got to be a Sabbath in there somewhere. And sometimes they overlap. You'll have 2 on the same day, in some cases, in some years. All right, so these are the feasts of the Lord. It goes on to say. Now, let's pick it up now in verse 39. Picks up a little more. It says, also on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered the fruit of the land, you shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. All right, so now you begin to get an indication of on our party, okay, is that if you're going to use P, I put down P-A-R-T-Y, P, plan. You have to plan to attend the feast. That's the first P for party, P-A-R. I'm going to go through the alphabets, and we're going to create our little party plan to have a great feast. All right? The first thing you need to plan, well, you think that sounds, well, that's stupid. Everybody knows that. Well, wait a minute. Do they? A new person coming to the church for the first year. In fact, I'm talking to a new person right before service, and it's, well, I don't know if I can make it. I said, God understands that. God knows your condition when you come in. And when you come in, you begin planning for the future because you see, that's your destiny. The Feast of Tabernacles represents the tabernacling, the reign with Christ, the millennial reign with Christ for 1,000 years. That is the ultimate picture of what this represents. That is your destiny. So what God's telling us today is that you got a plan to be at that. And to do that, you go through our rehearsals every year. Each year we keep the Feast of Tabernacles as we prepare for the 1,000-year reign with Jesus Christ. So what did I just read part of this plan? The plan is when you keep the feast unto the Lord 7 days after you have gathered the fruit of the land. So what did God just show us? He said there's a way that God says you have to prepare the finances to be able to go. So you just don't show up and go. Unless you're going to do like the world is, let me go see if I can make a loan. Well, that's not planning. That goes against the plan of God. You got to look forward, not behind. And I've known people who do that, and they get themselves in trouble because now they got to pay off the last loan they went to the feast, and now they got to go to the next one. Now they don't have the money for the next one. So then instead of saving the money to go to the feast, they begin paying interest to somebody who just lent them money. And they get further and further in the hole. So there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. All right, so this says when you gathered in the land. So we're not an agrarian society anymore, so your gathering today is your income. And I'm going to show you what God talks about with the income. The first day is the Sabbath. It's reinforcing what we just read. I'm in verse 39. And the 8th day is also a Sabbath. In verse, I'm going to go to, see what I got here. I'm going to go to 43. It says, you shall take of the first day the boughs of the boughs of the goodly trees and branches and palm trees and boughs of thick trees and willows and brook, and you shall place them, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. All right, so in your planning, God's telling you, I'm going to come to this rejoicing a little bit later, because in party, P-A-R-T-Y, you know what R stands for? It's rejoice. Can you imagine God's commanding you have to rejoice? That He's commanding you to have a good time and enjoy it. Wow, what a great God. To really, we got our joy man here. Clayton goes, did you bring your joy? All right, so here we're going through. Now, they're bringing in the trees and the willows. You know, in ancient Israel, you know what they did? They would build these booths, the sukkot, and they would build, and they would actually live in these little things. All right, so Our booths today, we use the temporary dwellings, we rent rooms or whatever. But what that meant was, what they had to do is they had to look back and see that these were temporary dwellings. The point of the Feast of Tabernacles is why you go where God says it's because God's commanded us to go to Jerusalem to keep the feast. And we're to dwell in temporary booths, temporary dwellings. I've got a thing here I'm going to read you. This is from Alfred Ebersheim. Alfred Ebersheim, and it's the book, or the article was, I think it's a book. The temple, it's called The Ministry and Services. And he lived in the, I think it was the 1700s or 1800s. And he wrote a number of things in this book. He was a Jew. He converted to become a Christian. Eventually, I think he was a Catholic. If not, he certainly was a Methodist or Presbyterian. And he's got some interesting things I'm going to quote back and forth from time to time. He said, the most joyous of all the festival seasons in Israel was that of the Feast of Tabernacles. It fell on a time of the year when the hearts of the people would naturally be thankful of the thanks and the fullness and the gladness and the expectancy of all the crops in the land that only awaited for the softening and the refreshment of the latter rain to prepare it for a new crop. So it was at the end of the year. The people had gathered in all the crops from the end of the year, and as they prepared, they would be preparing for the Feast of Tabernacles. They were also preparing stuff aside, so when the latter rains came, they began to plant for the next season. It says, if in the beginning the harvest had pointed back to the birth of Israel in their exodus from Egypt and forward to the true Passover and the sacrifice in the future, and if the corn harvest was connected to the giving of the law of Mount Sinai in the past and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost, the harvest of Thanksgiving of the Feast of Tabernacles reminded Israel on the one hand of their dwelling in booths in the wilderness, while on the other hand it pointed to the final harvest when Israel's mission would be completed and all nations were gathered unto the Lord. So what he's saying here is that there's a duality in the plan of God. So while we go and we dwell in the temporary booths, the temporary dwellings, what God's pointing us to is that the end time, the end gathering of all the fruits will be brought unto God. And it's talking about people. And so he wrote that. It says, the dual meaning says it reflects back to the miraculous message of Israel out of Egypt through the wilderness as they lived in rickety booths open to the heavens, and it depicts a very powerful manner of the final harvest of all the world to the true paths of God. And it's referencing Isaiah 2 and Micah 4. So it's talking about the fall harvest. So now, in the planning, if you're going to plan for the Feast of Tabernacles, while it's joyous, especially if someone's new, it's very difficult, could be very difficult. Let me tell you why. Not everyone who comes into the truth comes in with both mates. A lot of people come in with just one of them. The husband doesn't come or the wife doesn't come. Quite often the family doesn't come. When you begin to plan to go to the feast, it's 8 days. If you have a job, now your job is affected. All right, so quite often people get vacation. So you have to begin planning your vacation around the Feast of Tabernacles so that you have the time to take off to attend the Feast of Tabernacles. All right, so you have kids. Kids have to deal with school. They have to deal with peer pressure. They have to deal with the teachers because now they're going out for a religious function that the rest of the world doesn't understand. And by the way, many of these teachers today, they're more agnostic than anything. They hate people who try to follow God. And they make it difficult on your children, all the way into college. And they try to discourage them. So you're going away to somewhere to rejoice at the Feast of Tabernacles under all the pressure that you can imagine if you're not careful. So you really have to focus and plan for this properly. I get a question from time to time, well, my family member doesn't go to church, can they come to the feast? Don't leave them home. Bring them. They may not even attend service, but that's okay because they might next year. The point is, if they're willing to go with you, you take them. And then you plan to give them some enjoyment time while you are there. You don't rub their noses in it. You don't put them down. You know, you don't make them feel rejected because they don't understand. You express the love of God above all else. And if they can see the Spirit of God in you, God may turn them around one day. Now, I'll tell you this for example. My mom didn't want anything to do with the church. So the first year, my dad said, okay, listen, we're not doing this anymore. And she put up a Christmas tree. He let her. He let her. Against the wishes of the church. I know back then worldwide, that's the way it was. But he felt it was better to do that. He didn't participate. He didn't help. They let him put it up. Well, the next year, she didn't want to do that. For some reason, she said, well, it just ain't the same without the whole family doing it. Well, you know, after a few years, 10 years later, she got baptized. So you have to be patient and trust God. See, there's a calling, and people don't know this. And parents forget this with the children. You need to understand this, parents. If the child doesn't know yet, they may not yet have a calling. See, they have to be a call to the truth just like you do. You can't expect just because they're in your roof that they're going to understand all of this. That's not going to happen. It says each person must be called. However, through the sanction of the parent, the child might get called. Does that make sense? And so you got to give them time. You got to give them patience and understanding. Just so they're going through it. All right, so your planning takes a lot. Now, here's the big one. How are you going to pay for this? God hates borrowing. That's not God's plan. He's telling you don't borrow. All right, so how do you plan? God tells you how you plan. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 14. Deuteronomy chapter 14. Well, I set the clock, but I forgot to turn it on. So, Danny, if you just give me an idea on time, when I get to about 45 minutes, I'd really appreciate it. And we didn't start at 1 because of the prayer breakfast. I know we started late today, so I have no idea. Because I don't want this to be a long sermon. I want this to be more uplifting. I want to be able to hit everybody. I want to be able to reach the people who've been here for a long time. And because you see, we're supposed to go through these things. God says we're supposed to remember these things, and every year we're supposed to discuss them. You know, to meet in due season. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22. Says, and you shall truly tithe of all your increase of your seed in the field that brings forth year by year. You shall eat before the Lord in the place which he shall choose to place his name. Now, wait a minute. That's kind of strange. Talking about a tithe here. Now, that's not what you tithe all year long, that you tithe to God your regular tithes. That God says, has a man robbed me? He says, yeah, in tithes and offerings. So God says the 10th belongs to him. What God's telling you here, if you've never read this before, this is referred to as a second tithe. Like, oh man, now the church got to get another 10% out of me. And I've heard people do this. All right, here we go again. Get more money out of your pockets. This tithe is for you. This belongs to you. But what God's commanding you to do, he's commanding you to save that money. All right, that's your year-end savings plan to go to the Feast of Tabernacles. So every year and every week you get a paycheck. And this is a great sermon for right after the feast. And I usually say this after the feast. And we did this year. And a lot of y'all jumped in on that. We had a feast plan here. And people would put into the box for my feast fund. And let me tell you something. This year there's a lot more people going than last year. It worked. And we got room. So when I leave this year, when I leave the hotel, I'm going to tell everybody, all the rooms we got booked this year, book them for next year. And then you have time to cancel if you want to cancel or go to another site or whatever you want to do. But you're secure. So we got one step ahead. We got your room secured for next year. You can make your changes. So here's what God's telling you. When you get paid, you get 10% goes to God, 10% goes to you. That's your feast fund. You know, I used to look forward to that when I get my check. And it's hard, believe me, because you don't have any money already. I mean, between the taxes and government and insurances and you name it, you don't have any money. So when people say, well, look, I can't save a full 10% to go to the feast, I can only tell you that's what God says to do. You do the best you can. If you can't save the full 10, you go to God, and that's between you and God. It's not between you and Tom. You do the best you can, all right? And maybe by next year, maybe God will change your circumstances. You get a full 10%. All right, so, but that money, he says here, you shall eat before the Lord your God in the place that he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of the grain, of the wine, of the oil, of the firstlings, of the herds and the flocks, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. And if the place be too full for you, that you are not able to carry it all. In other words, they were agrarians. So you travel and may have to go for days for them, some of them. You got all the stuff they got to bring, the food and everything with them. When God's saying, if it's too far to carry all this stuff, he says, you shall place be too far from you, in verse 24, which the Lord shall choose to set his name there, when the Lord has blessed you. Then you shall turn it into money. Then you cash it in. You turn in your food, you get cash, and now you go with the cash. And basically, that's what we do. Your increase is from your jobs, and the increase comes from the cash. You cash your check, you put your money aside. And so you begin, and you take it with you, and you shall go into the place which the Lord your God shall choose. And you shall bestow that money for whatsoever your soul desires. Isn't that amazing? You're commanded to save your money, and then you go, God say, now you go spend it on yourself for whatever you want. Isn't that great? I can see, who's that comedian? He's always talking like a redneck. I can just say him saying, he says, man, isn't this kind of great stuff? You know, go there and do this for me. So now try to imagine this. If you can save a full 10% of your yearly income and go spend it in 1 week. If a person made $30,000, that means you go spend $3,000. If you made $50,000, you go spend $5,000. I've had some years that you couldn't spend it all. Then I've had years like, I'm going to make it. And so here's the point. If you're having a great year, people put aside, say, listen, here. And people put it in the box already. So here, this is excess tithes. I'm not going to need it. And we help people who are new, who are widows, or who can't go. This is not to give you a paid vacation. If a person's struggling, they come up short, the church generally is there to help with the lack, or to find a way to help a person get to the Feast of Tabernacles. That's part of a bigger family picture of what we're going here. So how do you go when you're planning stage? Is you plan by saving your second tithe. Your second tithe. So that's part of the plan. Now, A. P, where's my L? Man, I can't spell. I left the L out. Oh, it's party, not plan. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anybody want to finish this? See, that's why I don't give good, happy sermons. Because I don't know what I'm talking about. It's party. It ain't plan. All right, A. Now, this is funny. A. I said, what do I find for A? You have to attend. You have to be there. All right, so you have to attend. That sounds strange, but some people say, well, I don't know if I'm going to go this year. So, whoa, wait a minute. You don't have an option. You don't get a choice. You have to go. That's the rule. Can imagine it's the millennial reign. Christ just stepped foot on the earth, and he's beginning his millennial reign. You tell Christ, no, I don't think I'm going to go this time. You see the connection? It don't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. All right, so it's the rehearsal. So we have to attend. How do you attend? Well, somebody can say, well, you can attend by a plane, you can attend by a car. That's not what I'm talking about. How you attend, it's your mindset. When you attend, how are you attending? Now, it's already understood we have to be there. But how you attend is different. Now, there's a thing I learned, somebody told me a while back, that said, if Satan can't keep you from going, he'll do his best to keep you from enjoying it while you're there. It's your mindset. And I've been at the Feast of Tabernacles years and years ago that I went there and made myself absolutely miserable. Like, I'm here, but I don't want to be here. And I'm here, but I don't want to have a good time. And I've been through that. Look at Hebrews chapter 1. All right, Hebrews chapter 1. All right, Hebrews chapter 1. That's right after the Old Testament and a bunch of books. All right, Hebrews, actually, I don't want Hebrews 1, I want Hebrews 12. Don't forget, I have no idea what I'm saying up here. All right, Hebrews 12, verse 1. Seeing we have also compassed with so great a cloud of witnesses, lay aside every weight which so easily besets us, and let us run. Notice the words God uses. Let us run with patience the race that is set before us. The mindset when you go to Feast of Tabernacles is, I'm going to go there, and this is going to be my best feast ever. Now, people say that every year. I think they mean it. I don't think it's just a shop-worn phrase when people say, man, that was the best feast ever. And I say that because I think each year we mature in Christ. So each year our understanding and concept of how we do things becomes greater. For example, my first feast, you know what I went to the feast and I looked for? I want to go on go-kart rides. I'm 19, 20 years old, right? I'm going to have a fun time. Everybody talking about having a great time at the feast. I missed the idea of the sermons and the fellowship. I'm thinking, still I'm in this carnal state. This is my second year. I done left the first one miserable so I'm not going back to that state place no more. I'm going somewhere else. So I'm looking where all these feast sites are. And the feast site, well, the one up in the Ozarks looks great because they got lots to do. Get this magazine, this brochure. I'm going on go-karts. I'm going on bungee jumping. That was going to be my feast. I didn't realize that it was a vacation I was thinking, not the feast. So when I went there, I couldn't wait for services to get over because it was in my way. I want to get out of that thing so I can go have a great time. And that was my mindset. I was at the feast, but I wasn't there. I mean, if you want to have a lesson on all the things you don't do, let me tell you about how I enjoyed my feast. And I just didn't understand the idea and the concept of the feast. Years later, as I began to understand, it wasn't about all of that. And it's just that God finally brings you to conversion, and sometimes people are slow learners, and I was one of them, is you begin to learn things. Audrey and I went to the feast one time. We got hurricaned out somewhere. We wound up going to Jekyll Island. So in Jekyll Island, there wasn't a lot to do. Well, Audrey had brought her guitar. Her mom was with us at the time. We really didn't have anything to do, and we met some new people. So she invited them over to our condo because we were walking distance from the tabernacle. And they came over that day and they brought their guitar. And we just sat in the afternoon and they played songs. All afternoon they just played songs. We talked, we fellowshiped, we had food. And people started showing up from all around the areas. By the end of the day, there was 20 or 30 people there. The next day, they said, well, let's do this again. Before the end of the feast, we had like 100 people all gathered outside, sitting around, talking, fellowship. It was one of the best feasts we ever had, and we never went anywhere. And then everybody started bringing food. It just began to multiply. It just began to multiply. The couple was Carl and Pat Dillenbach. That was back in the late 80s, and we didn't see each other another 15 years again, and now we're back together again, and we still feel like the same family we met way back then. So one of the things you want to do when you attend is you want to have a plan on what you want to do. You want to be able to get together to fellowship with one another. All right, so we read, let's go now to same chapter, verse 13. Same chapter, verse 13. It says, and make straight the paths for your feet, lest that which is lame be turned out of the way, but rather be healed. Follow peace with all men, with holiness, and without which no man shall see the Lord, looking diligently. So what am I saying here? Is through all of these things that you're going through, is that you need to seek peace. You need to make straight your paths. Anything that's holding you back, you focus on God. And you seek God with all holiness. It says, looking diligently, lest any man fail, the grace of God with any root of bitterness, springing up, trouble you, and by it many are defiled. In other words, you can be keeping the Feast of Tabernacles and be such a rotten attitude that God won't bless your efforts. I was so miserable one time. I don't know what happened. I can't even remember what it was all about. I got mad in the middle of the night. I packed up my car and I was driving home. About 1 o'clock in the morning, I stopped in the middle of some town, which I don't know where I was. And I cried and I asked God, what in the world's wrong with me? What is going on? And I sat there and I cried for I don't know how long. And through my prayer, repair, and repentance, I turned around and I drove all the way back. I got back to the feast area in time to shave, to clean up, and go to the feast, and I had a great feast. Now, I don't know what took place at that time, but it was a struggle. And you may find some of those struggles while you're at the Feast of Tabernacles. And what God's saying is He's left us a cloud of witnesses. They didn't make it when they came out of Egypt. Where were they going? They were going to the Promised Land. God's called us out of Egypt, and we're going to the Promised Land. But you can have things that so easily beset you. Your family members are going to easily beset you if they're not in the church. They're going to say, well, listen, we don't have any funds anyway. How can you afford to do this? There's things that's going to come up, and Satan is going to find his way to try to beset you and make your legs weak, your hands stumble so that you can't find. And you're going to have to focus on God. And if He can give you the peace, and that's what you're going to need. That's why I'm reading this. Follow peace with all men. You're going to have to trust God to give you peace with those around you who don't understand. They just don't understand. And give them the patience and the love like God gives to us. All right, so now, or rejoice. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 12. It's amazing how God commands you to rejoice. Deuteronomy chapter 12. Let's see if I got this right. I remember one time I was mad about something. And I determined I was going to stay mad. Now, I know God says, don't let the sun go down in your wrath. That's why I don't like giving these sermons, because all my carnality comes out and shows you my past. But it's just true. I was mad. I don't remember why I was mad again, but I was mad. I woke up the next day, I didn't feel mad again. I was happy. I had to make myself mad again. I did. I honestly, and I did that for a week. I got tired of making myself mad. And I'm sitting there, it's like, why am I getting mad all the time? There's nobody around me, but I'm being mad. So God says when you go there, you go to the feast to rejoice. All right, Deuteronomy 12. That was the funniest thing back when I look back and say, what in the world was I thinking? You wake up the next day, you feel okay. So, oh, no, I'm not. I'm still mad. It says, but when you go over the Jordan and dwell in the land that the Lord God gives you to inherit, when He gives you rest from all your enemies around about, so that you dwell in safety, and there shall be a place which the Lord your God shall choose to call His name to dwell there, you shall bring of all that I command you, your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, and the heave offering in your hand, and with all the choice vows which you vow unto the Lord, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. Isn't that amazing? God says you have to rejoice. God wants us to have the best of everything there is. He wants you to have the abundance. He's teaching us moderation in all things. He's teaching you to balance all these things. So when you go to the feast, you begin to balance on what's important. You know, when I was younger, it was important to go-kart riding. It was important, you know. I don't know why it was important, but as I got older, I could care less about go-kart riding. What became more important is the spiritual impact of people's lives. And so here God's telling us here we have to rejoice before Him. How do you rejoice? I'll tell you, one of the greatest secrets to enjoy the feast, find a place to serve. Do something. You want to rejoice? You quit thinking about yourself and you rejoice. So you serve somebody. You know, one year that changed my life at the Feast of Tabernacles, everybody was busy, and I never really volunteered for a whole lot. And so there was a time that out in the tent, if you couldn't make it in the big room because they outgrew it, they put you out in a tent. The tent didn't have air conditioning and it had sand fleas. All right, so I'm out in this tent. But that time, I'm okay. I can deal with the heat and I can deal with the sand fleas. I didn't go home. I done grew past that. Well, people were looking for songbooks. They didn't have no songbooks. So they put him out in the tent, but they didn't give him any songs to sing, no songbooks. So I said, I'll just go get some songbooks. So I go in and I grabbed some songbooks, and I came back out. And next thing, everybody's coming over because there's like 100 people. So, can I get any songbooks? So I'm running back and forth. I'm getting songbooks. Well, the next day, nobody's out there serving again. So, okay, well, I'll go get some songbooks. And that, all of a sudden, for the rest of the feast, that became my responsibility, giving out songbooks. And so each year, I became more involved, and I was happy because I went to the feast and I had a responsibility. I was out, remember my first feast? I hated the heat, the fleas, and the bugs. So what's my first job? I'm in the heat, and the fleas, and the bugs. That's where I first served. And you know what? I was happy. See, the whole thing changed. And so gradually, and now God's blessed me, I get to not only see one place to serve, I get to go fly to all the sites to serve. And so you want to be happy? You find a place to serve. You find a widow who's having a tough time. You find someone that looks down. See if you can bring them your joy, so that they can rejoice. Meet someone new for the first time. We have a tendency to go meet with the old people we already know because that's our comfort zone. Find someone new. Plan some activity. You got a place that's near the meeting hall. Plan some activities in your room and invite guests. And I'm going to tell you, your feast will change. The rejoicing will increase. You will be busier and happier than ever. When you begin. So the R for party is rejoicing. Deuteronomy 16 reinforces that. If you want to go to Deuteronomy 16, verses 13 through 15, it talks about, again, to rejoice. And I'll just read 15. It says, 7 days you shall keep the solemn feast unto the Lord in the place that he chooses to place his name. Now, the reason God says it that way is that when Christ comes back, everybody's going to Jerusalem. But now it's like when they grew beyond the borders, where everybody can't go to Jerusalem. So what the church has done is it finds places where it works best for the most people. Like we have 5 U.S. sites where we have feasts. They're smaller sites because our church is small. But you know, if we didn't do that, you know what would happen? A lot of the people who support the church, they couldn't make it to the feast. Some of the elderly and the people with lack of income or sickness or health that doesn't have cars. So what we did is we try to find as many sites as we can have and still service properly. And we have those sites. So they are smaller, but I'll tell you what, they're packed with love and joy and excitement. They really are. They're really filled with that. And so we're really blessed to do that. That's what God says where he places his name. And he goes on to say, because the Lord your God shall bless you in all your increase and in all the works of your hands. Therefore you shall surely rejoice. So he goes, again, God's telling you, got all this together? You shall surely rejoice. All right, P-A-R, now we're on T. All right, T is for Tom. No, it's not. T is for treasure. Your feast should be a treasure. Every moment that you're there, make it your treasure. How do you do that? Every day you get up, you praise God and thank him for the opportunity that he has called you out of this rotten, sin, sick-filled world to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. You have a calling that this world has no clue of. I mean, you talk about a limited club. This is a party city. This is God's people who's been called out of this world. Now, a lot more people have been called. Few come. That means you've responded to the call. But not everybody gets the call, all right? So you want to be able to treasure every moment that you have. Try to do something special. You know, one of the things Audrey and I don't get to do with her like I used to, but one day during the feast, we would take one night by ourselves, and we'd find some very nice restaurant where we can be alone and enjoy the Feast of Tabernacles, have a glass of wine or a beer, and I mean in a really nice upscale restaurant. Because remember, you've been saving your tithes all year long. Do something special for your family, for your mate. Make the feast a treasure time. All right, my children, when they go back and they can talk about the feast, they talk about it with excitement. They remember all the feast. They talk to kids by all these new technologies today. And you know what comes up quite often? The feast. You want this to stick in their mind because, see, this is where we're going. Because that's what this millennial reign is going to be all about, is God's giving you the best, the richness, and the greatness so that we can work and train and teach other people. I had a lot for treasure, but I just, probably is redundant. And why? Why? Why do it? Y stands for yearly. So as soon as it's finished, you need to remember, you got to prepare for next year. It's a yearly event. Every year, you got to go to it. My first feast was in 1972. So I don't know how many that makes, but I'm in the 40s somewhere, I'm sure. But I mean, my first feast was 1972, and I haven't missed a one. Some of them weren't the best. Some of them were pretty miserable, but I learned from them. And I treasure every one I get to go to now. And I treasure the bad ones because I remind myself I don't want to do that again. So when you go to the Feast of Tabernacles, you need to plan now. For next year, when's the time to plan? Plan right now. Get ready for next year. Talk about it, look forward. Talk about it during the year. What we're going to do at the feast, what we can do for the feast. And in closing, I want to go through just a couple things here. Is that, let's go to Ecclesiastes 9. Ecclesiastes 9. I know this is probably, it's a very simple sermon. But let me say this. It's an important sermon. A sermon, if you take this advice and you have a family member who has never been to the feast or at your first feast, it can help steer you in a direction not to create more problems than already there. Because it's not easy. You have to plan. Your boss is not going to appreciate you leaving. If you just show up and say, hey, I got to go to the feast, and you had your 2-week vacation or your 1-week vacation already. So you have to begin planning for it. So Ecclesiastes 9, verse 10 is, whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom, or show in the past. Okay, so whatever you do, do with all your might. So how do you keep the Feast of Tabernacles? You keep it with all your might. One last tip. When you're there, when you're at the Feast of Tabernacles, remember the books of Proverbs and the books of Ecclesiastes. They are the books of wisdom. When you get up each day, I recommend you plan to read those books. During the Feast of Tabernacles, start at the beginning. By the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, read those 2 books. What they will do is they will guide your mindset and guide your thoughts while you got all that money to spend on things that are important, things that teach moderation, so that you realize when you got all that stuff, you don't need it. I learned that over the years that some of the best feasts I ever had were my poorest feast. I remember going to some of the feasts, and some of you may have limited funds. I remember making so little money when I was 20, 21 years old. I'd say, okay, I got like $8 a day to spend. And I would plan my feast on what I would spend in the morning, each day what I spend at lunch, basically, so that I'd have enough money to carry me through to the feast and still have enough money for gas to get home. Back then, I was making like $1.60 an hour, $2.20 an hour. There wasn't a whole lot of money. Of course, everything was cheaper then. When you're paying 30 cents a gallon for gas. But when you're down to that little bit of money, and you know what? I would find I wound up having a good time anyway, and then I'd have money for the next day. And so the next day says, wow, I get $10 today. It's silly. But when you got a limited funds, you trust God and plan for it, and He will help your mind to reinforce what's important. And I wound up those poor years bringing gifts home to family members who didn't keep the feast. And I didn't do without anything. I was invited to people who had plenty. I was invited where people all of a sudden paid for my meals. It was amazing. So you trust God, and when you go to the feast, how do you go? Not by plane, by car, by train. You go with the Spirit of God, and you let Him guide you. And you will have what it says here, and you will do the Feast of Tabernacles with all your might, with all your strength. Have a great feast. No matter when you see this message, you can play this message any time in the year, because it's always the time to plan for the next feast.